Well, you can, but you're going to run into some potential legal backlash. There were very imaginative attempts to deal with the rural black community in the 90s that gave rise to litigation, and really basically the court pulled back and said, you have to look for compact areas of minority growth. You can't go and pick out pockets and draw really unusual shapes to create majority-minority seats. So, fortunately, this gets back to a point you made earlier, a lot of the growth is in the urban areas. And so the urban areas, the issue of drawing non-compact districts is not as much of a problem. But where there is Latino rural growth, that's when these issues of exactly what is the obligation of a state, how far do they go in drawing perhaps not absolutely compact seats in order to either meet the legal requirement or, and this is equally important, the political requirement, because the Latinos don't get representation simply because the law requires it. The Latino community has been very skilled in advocating. They have wonderful groups that are out there at all the hearings that are advocating for seats, even when they're not legally required, because they are a community of interest, because they're an identifiable geographic compact area that should be protected. So, it will be interesting to see how this plays out.
It's also interesting to see states begin to bridle, to be a little tense about the continued application of the Voting Rights Act. They say, look, the situation that was in place in the 1960s simply isn't the way we are anymore. And it's gone from being a small voice to people who will get up on TV and get up in public forums and say, we don't need to work under those strictures anymore. And also, doesn't time take care of some of this? If you drew Congressman Serrano's district or Congressman Velasquez's district in New York or Congressman Gutierrez's district in Illinois in a slightly different way, they're all long, veteran members of Congress in almost entirely Democratic areas. Do you have to make a Latino supermajority for a 9-term congressperson to keep them heading to Congress, Erica? I mean, couldn't Serrano win in the Bronx without having special lines drawn for him to make it a walk for him to win?
I don't know. It depends on who would challenge him, So, but clearly, like, the bottom line concern is making sure that people have access and that lines are not drawn in a way to disenfranchise folks. And it also becomes a concern in terms of also this whole birthright citizenship movement, and looking at a whole population about how to looking at an entire population that's growing and shifting the demographics, and how do you corral groups within that so that they can't realize their political potential. Right. So if you look at this movement to sort of deny citizenship to the children of immigrants who are born here, or you look at, for example, immigration detention, which is a bell that we've been ringing, sounding, because an alarm that we've been sounding, because, for example, you have all these criminal justice reforms that are settling in and that are affecting African Americans and native-born Hispanics. At the same time, you still have this bed space available, and you still have private facilities that run these beds and need to keep them, need to have people sitting on those beds, and ultimately their goal is a profit. So detention, looking at immigration detention and how people are collapsed in terms of hardened criminals to folks who have just violated immigration laws, basic immigration laws, and how they're collapsed and then corralled into detention, is a question that we need to look at, in terms of how this sort of growing monster of immigration detention is sort of growing, and then also like channeling, creating a pipeline of folks into these facilities. So those are two areas I think that Latinos and advocacy groups need to look at in terms of how Latinos are being targeted in specific ways, and what are the implications for policy and politics.
When you see that big new number from the 2010 census of Latin American population, does that intensify and sharpen the immigration debate, or is it a sign that sort of eventually numbers are going to take care of this and we're not going to fight that much about it anymore?
No, I mean, it doesn't matter the numbers, it's the tenor and the targeting. I mean, when you have, we're still covering hate crimes and hate cases from Shenandoah, Pennsylvania, to Long Island, to other parts of the country. So there's still this hostility and this this resistance to sort of coming to the table and resolving this for the population that's here now in terms of undocumented folks. And then you have another thread, which is like this, just a group of Americans that's always going to believe that Latinos are outsiders, whether you're a citizen, whether you've been here 10 generations or not. This sort of like gluing oneself to a notion of what is American, who's American and who's not. So you have all of these tensions, and then of course, as my fellow panelists have talked about, Latinos who are channeling into what are considered non-traditional areas of the country for Latinos. So, I mean, all of those dynamics are not just gonna, because all of these tensions are gonna sort of, the numbers don't take care of the situation. All of these dynamics are at play, and until they're resolved or until people come to common sense and compassionate solutions towards these, then we're not going to move as a nation.